Look, I need to start this off with something that's been sitting heavy on my mind for months now. And honestly, it's the kind of thing most travelers don't want to think about because it's inconvenient and it's uncomfortable. But here it is anyway. You walk away from the check-in counter, you watch your bag disappear behind those heavy rubber curtains, and you just assume it's going to show up at baggage claim on the other end with everything exactly the way you packed it. That assumption, that simple, innocent belief that your luggage is safe once it leaves your hands, is probably the single most dangerous mindset you can have when you fly in 2026. So, let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you scroll past or shrug it off. Have you ever, even for a second, worried that something was taken from your checked bag, or worse, that something was put into it without your knowledge? I'm not talking about the airline losing your suitcase or it arriving 3 days late. I'm talking about the integrity of the bag itself, what happens between the curb and the carousel. If you've ever had that uneasy feeling, or if you've actually opened your suitcase at home and noticed something off, something missing, something that wasn't yours, I want you to hold on to that feeling. Actually, I want you to drop it in the comments below because you are not alone. And the stories I've gathered over the last several years of traveling and researching this are going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about checked luggage. I'm going to say this as plainly as I can. Your checked luggage is not safe in 2026, and I don't say that to scare you for the sake of drama. I say it because the system is broken in ways that most travelers don't see, and the people who exploit that system are counting on your blind faith. They are counting on you assuming that because the TSA is involved, everything is under control. They are counting on you being too rushed, too tired, too distracted by the chaos of the terminal to ask the right questions. And frankly, they are counting on the fact that most passengers don't even know what questions to ask in the first place. Now, before I go any further, I need you to understand something about how I approach this topic. I am not here to tell you that every baggage handler is a thief, or that TSA officers are careless, or that every flight ends with a horror story. That would be dishonest, and frankly, it would undermine the real issue. The vast majority of people who handle your luggage are doing their jobs correctly, under difficult conditions, with tight deadlines, and often for pay that does not reflect the responsibility they carry. But it only takes one person with bad intentions, or one policy failure, or one moment of oversight, and suddenly your belongings are not just lost, they are compromised in ways that can follow you long after you've left the airport. And here's the part that most travelers never stop to consider. The threat to your checked luggage is not always theft. In fact, theft is almost the least disturbing possibility. What keeps me up at night, and what should concern you far more than a missing pair of headphones, is the possibility that your luggage is being used as a courier service without your consent. I'm talking about smuggling. I'm talking about contraband. I'm talking about items placed into your suitcase by someone who has access to it in the baggage handling system. Items that you never packed, items that you never saw, items that you would never knowingly transport. And because the bag is checked under your name, because your itinerary is attached to that suitcase, you become responsible for whatever is inside it the moment it goes through security screening, and certainly the moment it is claimed at your destination. Now you might be thinking, that sounds like something out of a movie, not something that happens to regular people flying from Chicago to Orlando for a family vacation. And I understand that reaction, I really do. But I have spoken to travelers who have found themselves in exactly that situation. Regular people with regular jobs and regular vacations. And the look on their faces when they tell the story, that mixture of confusion and violation and fear, it stays with you. One woman I spoke with, she arrived in Phoenix after a connecting flight in Dallas, opened her suitcase in her hotel room, and found a sealed plastic bag containing a white, powdery substance tucked into the lining of her suitcase. She had never seen it before. She had no idea how it got there. And she spent the next 6 hours in a hotel room waiting for local law enforcement to arrive and determine whether she was a victim or a suspect. I'm not telling you this to make you afraid of flying. I'm telling you this because knowledge is the only real defense you have, and the airline industry, the TSA, and the airport authorities are not going to give you this information. They benefit from your assumption that everything is fine. They benefit from you not asking questions. They benefit from you dropping your bag at the counter and walking away without a second thought. Because the moment travelers start demanding accountability, the moment we start treating checked luggage as the vulnerable asset it actually is, the entire system would have to change. And that change would cost money, and it would slow things down, and it would inconvenience the very passengers who are currently too distracted to notice how exposed they really are. So let's talk about what actually happens to your bag from the moment it leaves your hand. I want to walk you through this process in detail, not because the mechanics are particularly interesting on their own, but because understanding the geography of your suitcase, where it goes, who has access to it, what the security checkpoints actually do and do not accomplish, is the first step in protecting yourself. Most travelers imagine that their bag goes from the check-in counter onto a conveyor belt, through a TSA screening machine, and then directly into the belly of the plane. That is technically true, but it is also an enormous oversimplification that leaves out the dozens of hands, the unmonitored corridors, the unsupervised holding areas, and the moments when your bag is completely alone and completely vulnerable. When you check a bag at the counter, the agent prints a baggage tag, wraps it around the handle, and places the bag onto a scale. That scale is connected to a conveyor system, but the conveyor does not lead directly to the plane. It leads into a back-of-house area that is, for all practical purposes, invisible to passengers. Now, the TSA does screen-checked baggage, and they do it using a combination of computed tomography scanners, which are basically advanced X-ray machines, and explosive trace detection. But here is what most people do not realize. The TSA does not screen every bag at every airport in the same way, and they certainly do not screen every bag at the moment it enters the system. There are airports where bags are screened immediately upon entering the conveyor network, and there are airports where bags are collected in a holding area and screened in batches, sometimes minutes or even hours before the flight departs. That gap, that window between check-in and screening, is an opportunity. And it is not just a theoretical opportunity. I have spoken with airport employees, not TSA officers, but other personnel who work in the baggage handling areas, and the stories they tell about the lack of oversight in certain facilities are genuinely alarming. There are airports in the United States where baggage handlers from multiple airlines share the same back-of-house space, where contract workers come and go with relatively little vetting, where security cameras are positioned more to monitor equipment failures than human behavior, and where a bag sitting on a cart waiting to be loaded is essentially unattended for periods of time that would shock the passenger who packed it. Now, I am not naming specific airports here, and I am not trying to suggest that every facility is a free-for-all, but I am telling you that the uniformity of security that passengers assume exists simply does not. There are weak points, and the people who understand those weak points exploit them. This is where the conversation usually turns to TSA-approved locks, and I need to address that head-on because the marketing around those locks has done an incredible job of making travelers feel secure without actually providing meaningful security. A TSA-approved lock is not a deterrent to theft. It is not a deterrent to tampering. It is, in almost every practical sense, a signal to anyone handling your bag that you are not watching, that you have placed your trust in a system, and that the contents of your suitcase are accessible to anyone who has a master key or knows how to use a ballpoint pen to bypass the zipper. I have had people argue with me about this, insisting that the lock at least makes it harder for casual thieves. But here's the reality. The zipper is the weak point, not the lock. A standard suitcase zipper can be opened in seconds with a pen, and it can be closed again in a way that leaves absolutely no visible trace. You can buy the most expensive TSA-approved lock on the market, and someone with a basic understanding of luggage construction can be inside your bag, remove whatever they want, insert whatever they want, and close the zipper, and you will never know. And I want to be clear about something else. When I talk about theft from checked luggage, I am not talking about the occasional missing candy bar or a souvenir t-shirt. I am talking about organized, systematic pilfering that targets specific items. I have reviewed enough incident reports and spoken with enough travelers to know that the items most commonly stolen from checked bags are jewelry, electronics, cash, prescription medications, and designer goods. But here is the pattern that should concern you. These thefts almost never happen on direct flights. They happen when you have a connection. They happen when your bag is transferred from one aircraft to another and sits in a holding area for an hour or more. They happen when the airline is short-staffed and contract workers are brought in to handle the overflow. They happen when the bag is clearly tagged as containing something valuable, which is why professional travelers will tell you never to put anything of value in a checked bag, but also never to put anything in a checked bag that visibly signals value, like a designer suitcase or a bag with a luxury brand luggage tag. Now, let me shift gears for a moment because I want to talk about something that almost never gets mentioned in these conversations, and it is actually the most important part of the entire discussion. We spend so much time worrying about what might be taken from our luggage, and we spend almost no time worrying about what might be put into it. And I understand why. The idea of someone else's belongings ending up in your suitcase feels abstract, like a problem that happens to other people in other circumstances. But the reality is that smuggling contraband through commercial aviation is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And one of the most effective methods is using unsuspecting passengers as unwitting couriers. Your checked bag is a perfect vehicle for this because it moves through the system with your identity attached to it. If a smuggler wants to move something from Los Angeles to New York, they do not want to check a bag under their own name. They want to put it into a bag that belongs to a family of 4 on their way to visit relatives. Because that bag is not going to attract attention. That bag is not going to be flagged for secondary screening. That bag is going to sail through the system because the system is designed to process massive volumes of luggage quickly, not to verify that every item inside every bag belongs to the passenger who checked it. And before you dismiss this as paranoia, I want you to consider how baggage handling actually works in a major hub airport. When you check a bag, it is routed through a series of conveyor belts, scanners, and sorting systems. At many airports, this system is fully automated with barcode readers directing each bag to the correct gate. But between those automated systems are human touch points. There are areas where bags are manually moved from one cart to another, where they are inspected by TSA officers, where they are loaded onto dollies and driven across the tarmac. At each of these touch points, a person has physical access to your bag. And at some of these touch points, that person is working alone, in a noisy environment, with minimal supervision, surrounded by hundreds of identical bags that no one is watching. The opportunity to open a suitcase, insert a small package, and close it again is not theoretical. It is routine. I want to tell you about a traveler I met, a man in his early 60s who had flown dozens of times without incident. He was coming back from a business trip, direct flight, nothing unusual. When he got home, he unpacked his suitcase and found a small plastic bag containing what looked like counterfeit pills tucked into the interior pocket of his garment bag. He had never seen them before. He had no idea how they got there. His first instinct was that his wife had put them there by mistake, but she had not. His second instinct was that the dry cleaner had left them in the bag, but the garment bag had not been to the cleaners. He called the airline, and the airline told him to call the TSA. The TSA told him to call local law enforcement. Local law enforcement told him there was nothing they could do without evidence of who had placed the items in his bag. He was left with a bag of pills he could not identify, a growing sense of unease, and no answers. He told me that he still flies, but he no longer checks a bag. He packs everything into a carry-on, and he does not care if it is inconvenient. He said the inconvenience of dragging a roller bag through the terminal is nothing compared to the anxiety of not knowing what is inside his own suitcase. Now, I am not suggesting that everyone should stop checking luggage. That is not realistic for long trips, for families, for travelers who need to bring equipment or gifts or specialized items. But I am suggesting that you need to treat checked luggage differently than you do now. You need to approach it with a mindset that assumes vulnerability rather than security, and you need to take specific, deliberate steps to protect yourself and your belongings. And this is where most advice columns fail because they give you generic tips like put your contact information inside the bag or use brightly colored luggage straps to make it easy to identify. That is not security. That is organization. Security requires a different level of thinking. So let me tell you what I do, and let me tell you why I do it. The first thing I do before I even open my suitcase is I take photographs of everything I am packing. Not just the outside of the bag, not just the zipper pulls, but the contents. I lay everything out on the bed, I arrange it in a way that shows the approximate quantity and value of the items, and I take clear, well-lit photographs from multiple angles. Then I pack the bag, and I take another photograph of the closed bag showing the configuration of the locks or zipper pulls or luggage strap. I do this for every single trip, and I do it because if something is missing, if something is added, if the bag arrives and the locks are in a different position than when I left them, I have documentation. I have evidence. I have a record that shows what I actually packed and how I packed it. The TSA and the airlines will tell you that you need to report theft immediately, and that is true. But they will also ask you what was taken, and if you cannot list the specific items with reasonable accuracy, your claim will be denied. Photographs are not a guarantee, but they are far better than memory, especially when you are tired and disoriented after a long flight. The second thing I do is I use tamper-evident seals in addition to locks. Now, I want to be very specific about what I mean by tamper-evident seals. I am not talking about the little plastic zip ties that come with a luggage lock set. I am talking about single-use numbered security seals, the kind that are designed for shipping and logistics that cannot be removed without cutting them, and that have a unique serial number that I record before I leave. These seals do not prevent someone from opening your bag. They do not replace a lock. What they do is they provide undeniable evidence that your bag has been opened. If you hand your bag to the agent with a green seal on the zipper pull and you pick it up at baggage claim and the seal is green, but it is a different brand, or the serial number does not match, or the seal is completely missing, you know immediately that someone has been inside. That knowledge is power, because it tells you that you need to inspect the contents carefully before you leave the airport, and it gives you leverage when you file a report. Without that evidence, you are left guessing, and the airline will always guess in their own favor. The third thing I do, and this is the one that people resist the most, is I shrink wrap my luggage at the airport when it is available. I know the objections. It is expensive. It is wasteful. It takes extra time. I have heard all of them, and I understand them. But here is what shrink wrap does that nothing else can do. It makes your bag physically difficult to access quickly. It does not make it impossible, but it raises the effort level. And in an environment where baggage handlers are processing hundreds of bags per hour, raising the effort level is often enough to deter tampering. More importantly, shrink wrap makes tampering obvious. If you wrap your bag at the airport and it arrives at your destination with the wrap intact, you know it has not been opened. If the wrap is cut or missing, you know it has been accessed, and you can take appropriate action. I have had travelers tell me that they do not want to use shrink wrap because it feels like they are admitting that the system is broken. And I understand that sentiment, I really do. But the system is broken, whether you admit it or not, and shrink wrap is not an admission of defeat. It is an adaptation to reality. Now let me talk about something that is going to make some people uncomfortable, and I need you to stay with me here, because this is where the conversation gets really serious. I have not yet mentioned the TSA's role in all of this, and that is deliberate, because the relationship between passengers and the TSA is complicated, and it is often misunderstood. The TSA is not there to protect your belongings. They are there to protect the aircraft and its passengers from explosive devices and other catastrophic threats. They are not your security service. They are not your lost and found department. They are not responsible for the contents of your suitcase beyond the specific mission of aviation security. And yet, when travelers discover that something has been taken from their bag, the first person they want to blame is the TSA. Sometimes that blame is warranted. There have been documented cases of TSA officers stealing from luggage, and those officers have been prosecuted and terminated. But the overwhelming majority of theft from checked luggage does not happen at the TSA screening checkpoint. It happens in the uncontrolled spaces before or after that checkpoint, and it happens to bags that are not locked, not sealed, and not monitored. I want to be careful here because I do not want to give the impression that the TSA is blameless or that their screening procedures are flawless. There are legitimate criticisms to be made about the consistency of TSA screening, about the training of officers, about the handling of bags that are selected for physical inspection. When the TSA opens your bag, they are supposed to leave a notice inside informing you that the bag was inspected. But those notices are not always left, and even when they are, they do not guarantee that nothing was taken. They only guarantee that the bag was opened. If you find a TSA inspection notice in your bag, and you also find that something is missing, you have a valid complaint and you should file it. But you should also understand that the notice is not an admission of guilt. It is simply a record of an action. So what do you do if you open your suitcase at baggage claim and you immediately know something is wrong? This is a scenario that most travelers have never rehearsed, and it shows. People stand at the carousel, staring into their open suitcase, looking around helplessly, not sure whether to confront the airline agent, call the police, or just take the bag and deal with it later. Dealing with it later is almost always the wrong choice. If you leave the baggage claim area with your suitcase, you have essentially accepted the condition of that suitcase. You can still file a claim later, but the airline will ask you why you did not report it immediately, and the TSA will ask you why you did not request a supervisor at the airport. Your credibility is undermined by delay, and the chances of a successful resolution drop significantly. So here's what you need to do step by step, and I want you to visualize this because it might save you a lot of trouble someday. The moment you notice something missing or something added or any sign that your bag has been tampered with, do not move. Do not walk away from the carousel. Do not take the bag outside. Find the nearest airline representative, preferably at the baggage service office, and tell them exactly what you have discovered. Be specific. Be calm. Do not make accusations you cannot support. Tell them that your bag appears to have been opened without your consent, that items are missing, or that items have been added that do not belong to you. Request that a report be filed and get a copy of that report. If the airline refuses to file a report, which sometimes happens with smaller regional carriers, ask for that refusal in writing. Then, and this is important, contact local law enforcement. Not TSA, not the airport authority, not the airline's corporate customer service line. Local police. If contraband has been placed in your bag, you need a law enforcement record that establishes you as the victim, not the suspect. If valuable items have been stolen, the police report is essential for insurance claims and for any legal action you might pursue. I have seen travelers skip this step because they are embarrassed, because they are in a hurry, because they do not want to cause a scene. And I understand the instinct. No one wants to be that person standing at baggage claim, holding up the line while a police officer takes notes. But let me reframe this for you. You are not causing a scene. You are documenting a crime. You are creating a paper trail that protects you from liability and preserves your right to compensation. The airline and the TSA process thousands of claims every year, and the ones that get resolved are the ones with the best documentation. The ones that get dismissed are the ones where the traveler says, "I think something might be missing, but I am not sure, and I do not have any proof." Now, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, because the conversation about checked luggage safety cannot be separated from the broader changes happening in commercial aviation in 2026. The industry is still recovering from the operational disruptions of the past several years, and the labor market for baggage handlers, ramp agents, and other ground operations personnel has not stabilized. Airlines are relying more heavily on third-party contractors, and those contractors often pay less, provide less training, and have higher turnover than the legacy airline employees they replaced. This is not a judgment on the quality of those workers. Many of them are hardworking and conscientious. But high turnover environments are inherently more vulnerable to bad actors. It takes time to identify someone who is exploiting their position, and by the time they are caught, they have often moved on to another contractor at another airport. At the same time, passenger volumes are increasing, and airports are struggling to expand their infrastructure to keep pace. More passengers means more bags, and more bags means more strain on the handling systems. When the system is under strain, shortcuts are taken, bags are left unattended, screening protocols are abbreviated. Security cameras that were installed to monitor high-risk areas are repurposed to monitor congestion points. The margin for error shrinks, and the opportunities for exploitation expand. I bring this up not to depress you, but to explain why the old advice about checked luggage no longer applies. 20 years ago, if you asked an experienced traveler how to protect your checked bag, they would tell you to buy a good lock and pack your valuables in your carry-on. That was sufficient then. It is not sufficient now. The threat landscape has changed, and your defense strategy has to change with it. So, let me give you the defense strategy that I use, the one I have developed over years of flying and researching and talking to the people who work in and around this system. It is not a single action, it is a mindset, and it is a set of habits that you build into your travel routine until they become automatic. First, you need to accept that the checked bag is not a secure container. It is a transport vessel, and it should never contain anything that you cannot afford to lose, cannot afford to have stolen, or cannot afford to explain. If you are traveling with expensive jewelry, heirloom items, large amounts of cash, or sensitive business documents, those items do not belong in checked luggage. Period. There is no lock, no seal, no shrink wrap that justifies putting irreplaceable items in the belly of an airplane. The cargo hold is not a safe, it is a compartment. Treat it accordingly. Second, you need to develop a packing system that makes tampering obvious. This is not about making your bag impossible to open. That is not realistic. It is about making unauthorized access detectable. Use numbered security seals. Use tamper-evident tape over the zipper heads. Use luggage straps in bright colors that you photograph before you leave. Create a baseline of how your bag looks when it leaves your possession, and compare it to how it looks when you reclaim it. This takes less than 5 minutes at home and less than 10 seconds at baggage claim, and it is the single most effective way to protect yourself. Third, you need to understand the geography of your journey. When you book a flight with a connection, especially a tight connection, your bag is going to be transferred quickly, and that transfer process is where the vulnerabilities are highest. If you have a choice between a direct flight and a connecting flight, even if the direct flight costs more or arrives later, consider whether the peace of mind is worth the difference. For some travelers it is, for others it is not. But at least make the decision consciously, not passively. Fourth, you need to stop assuming that the baggage claim area is the finish line. It is actually the last checkpoint, and it is your final opportunity to inspect your bag before you accept responsibility for it. I have seen travelers grab their suitcase off the carousel, glance at the handle to confirm it is theirs, and walk straight out the door without ever looking at the zippers, the locks, the straps, or the overall condition of the bag. They are in a hurry. They are tired. They just want to get to the hotel, or the rental car, or the curb. I understand all of that, but that 30-second inspection, That quick visual confirmation that everything is as it should be is the difference between catching a problem at the airport where you can do something about it and discovering it at home where your options are limited and your credibility is diminished. Now, I want to talk about something that I have not seen covered anywhere else, and it is the question of timing. When does the risk to your checked luggage actually peak? Most travelers assume that the highest risk is during the screening process, because that is when the bag is opened and inspected. But the data, to the extent that it is available, suggests otherwise. The highest risk period is actually the holding period, the time between when the bag is screened and when it is loaded onto the aircraft. During this window, the bag has been cleared by security, so it is no longer a candidate for secondary screening. It is sitting on a cart in a holding area, often outdoors, or in a semi-secure location, waiting to be driven to the plane. This is the moment when the bag is most accessible and least monitored. And this is the moment when tampering is most likely to occur. I have spoken with ramp workers who describe these holding areas as chaotic and unsupervised. In some airports, multiple airlines use the same ramp, and baggage carts from different carriers are parked side by side. There is no system of accountability for who approaches which cart. There is no requirement for identification badges to be visible from a distance. There is no regular patrol of these areas by security personnel. The assumption is that once a bag is screened, it is safe. That assumption is not supported by the reality of airport operations. So, what can you do about a vulnerability that occurs after your bag has left your site and before it is loaded onto the plane? You cannot follow your bag onto the ramp. You cannot stand guard over the baggage cart. What you can do is make your bag less attractive as a target. You can remove any external indicators of value. You can avoid designer luggage that signals wealth. You can pack in a way that does not invite curiosity. You can use seals that make tampering detectable. You cannot eliminate the vulnerability, but you can reduce it, and that reduction matters. Let me also address a misconception that I hear constantly from travelers, which is that the airlines are responsible for the contents of your checked bag. This is not entirely accurate, and understanding the limits of airline liability is essential if you ever need to file a claim. Under the Montreal Convention, which governs international flights, and under DOT regulations for domestic flights, airlines are liable for lost or damaged baggage up to certain limits. Those limits are not generous. For domestic flights, the maximum liability is typically around $3,800 per passenger, and that is for the bag itself and its contents combined. If you are traveling with items that exceed that value, you need to purchase excess valuation insurance from the airline at the time you check your bag, or you need to rely on your own travel insurance or homeowner's policy. The airline is not going to reimburse you for a $5,000 camera that was stolen from your checked bag, even if you have proof of theft and a police report, unless you declared the value and paid the additional fee at check-in. I have watched travelers learn this lesson the hard way, standing at the baggage service counter, waving receipts and photographs, insisting that the airline owes them compensation. The agent behind the counter is sympathetic, but the computer system does not care about sympathy. The liability cap is the liability cap. If you did not declare the value and pay for excess coverage, you are entitled to a fraction of what you lost, if anything at all. This is not the airline being unreasonable. This is the regulatory framework that governs commercial aviation, and it is the same framework that keeps ticket prices lower than they would be if airlines were fully liable for every item in every checked bag. You need to understand this before you fly, not after you file a claim. Now let me shift to a topic that is even less comfortable, and that is the question of what happens when the contraband placed in your bag is discovered by law enforcement before you have a chance to report it. This is the nightmare scenario, the one that no one wants to think about, and the one that I have heard described by travelers who were detained at customs, questioned by federal agents, and subjected to invasive searches because their luggage contained items they did not pack. In most of these cases, the traveler was eventually cleared, but the clearing process took hours, sometimes days, and it left them with a record of investigation that followed them across subsequent border crossings. The assumption of innocence is a legal principle, but it is not always the first instinct of an officer who has just discovered a suspicious package in a suitcase that bears your name and your itinerary. I do not want to overstate this risk. The vast majority of checked bags are never tampered with, and the vast majority of travelers will never experience this situation. But the travelers who have experienced it will tell you that they never thought it would happen to them either. They were ordinary people on ordinary trips, and they found themselves in extraordinary circumstances because someone else made a choice about their luggage without their knowledge or consent. So let me give you the advice that I give to my own family, the advice that I follow myself every time I fly. Do not pack anything in your checked luggage that you cannot afford to lose. Do not pack anything that you would be embarrassed or compromised to explain, and do not assume that your bag is private property once it leaves your hands. The suitcase that you carefully packed in your bedroom becomes a public object in the airport system. It is handled, inspected, scanned, and transported by people who do not know you and who have no stake in your satisfaction. It is not a violation of your rights to acknowledge this reality. It is a recognition of how the system actually operates. Now I want to talk about something that rarely gets discussed in these conversations, and that is the psychological dimension of luggage tampering. When a traveler discovers that something has been taken from their suitcase, the initial emotion is often not anger, but confusion. They question themselves. Did I really pack that item? Did I leave it at home by mistake? Did my spouse move it to another bag? The mind does not want to accept that a stranger has handled your personal belongings, that someone has gone through your socks and your underwear and your toiletries with the casual indifference of a warehouse worker sorting parcels. There is something deeply unsettling about the violation of that boundary, and it lingers long after the stolen item has been replaced or forgotten. I have spoken with travelers who stopped checking luggage altogether after a single incident, not because the value of the stolen item was significant, but because the feeling of violation was so profound. They described it as a loss of trust, not just in the airline or the TSA, but in the entire travel ecosystem. They became hypervigilant at airports, watching their bags more closely, questioning every interaction, scrutinizing every baggage handler who came near their belongings. Some of them told me that they still feel that way years later, that flying is no longer the neutral experience it once was, that it is now tinged with suspicion and anxiety. I am not telling you this to make you anxious. I am telling you this because the emotional impact of luggage tampering is real, and it is often dismissed by airlines and authorities who focus only on the financial loss. If you are a victim of theft or tampering, you are entitled to feel violated. You are entitled to be upset. You are not being unreasonable or dramatic. You are responding normally to an abnormal situation. So what do we do about all of this? How do we protect ourselves in a system that is not designed for our protection? The honest answer is that we cannot fully protect ourselves. We cannot control every variable. We cannot follow our bags through the conveyor belts and onto the tarmac. We cannot force the airlines to install cameras in every baggage holding area or require biometric authentication for every baggage handler. What we can do is make informed choices. We can educate ourselves about the risks. We can develop habits that reduce our exposure. We can document our belongings and our packing process. We can inspect our bags at baggage claim with the same attention we give to our boarding passes and our passports. And we can demand better from the industry, not through outrage and accusation, but through persistent, reasonable pressure on the airlines and the regulatory agencies that oversee them. I want to be clear about something before I wrap this up. I am not telling you to stop flying. I am not telling you that the system is irredeemably broken or that every trip is a gamble with your belongings. What I am telling you is that the passive trust that most travelers place in the checked baggage system is no longer justified. The evidence, both statistical and anecdotal, points to a system under stress, with vulnerabilities that are actively exploited by people with bad intentions. You can continue to travel the way you always have, dropping your bag at the counter and hoping for the best, and you will probably be fine. Most people are fine, but if you are not fine, if your bag is one of the ones that gets targeted, the consequences can be far more serious than a missing pair of shoes. And this is why I keep coming back to the question I asked at the beginning. The question about whether you have ever had that uneasy feeling, that sense that something was not right with your luggage. That feeling is not irrational. It is not paranoid. It is your intuition responding to a vulnerability that you have not yet articulated. The travelers who ignore that feeling are the ones who are most surprised when they open their suitcase and find evidence that someone else has been inside. The travelers who pay attention to that feeling, who use it as motivation to change their habits and tighten their procedures, are the ones who avoid the worst outcomes. So let me ask you again, and this time I want you to really think about it. Have you ever, even for a second, worried that something was taken from your checked bag, or worse, that something was put into it without your knowledge? Have you ever arrived at your destination, unzipped your suitcase, and felt that moment of hesitation before you looked inside? If you have, you already know what I am talking about. If you have not, I hope you never experience it. But either way, The information I have shared here is your toolkit. It is not a guarantee, but it is an advantage. It is the difference between being a passive participant in a flawed system and being an active, informed traveler who understands the risks and takes reasonable steps to mitigate them. I have spent years studying this topic, not because I enjoy dwelling on worst-case scenarios, but because I believe that knowledge is the only meaningful defense against exploitation. The airlines are not going to educate you about these risks. The TSA is not going to warn you about the vulnerabilities in the baggage handling system. The airports are not going to advertise the gaps in their security protocols. That information is not withheld out of malice, but out of institutional self-preservation. Acknowledging vulnerability creates liability, or at least the perception of liability. So the industry stays silent, and passengers stay uninformed, and the cycle continues. But you are no longer uninformed. You now know that your checked luggage is not safe in 2026, not because the system is collapsing, but because it was never as secure as you assumed it was. You know that the lock on your suitcase is a symbol, not a barrier. You know that the TSA inspection notice does not guarantee that nothing was taken. You know that the transfer point is the weak link. You know that your bag can be used as a courier service without your consent, and you know what to do about it. So here is my final piece of advice, the one I wish someone had given me 20 years ago when I started traveling regularly. Do not wait for the system to fix itself. Do not wait for the airlines to implement better security protocols or for the TSA to reform its screening procedures. Do not wait for the perfect lock or the foolproof luggage tracker. The system will improve slowly, if it improves at all, and your next trip is next week, not 5 years from now. So take responsibility for your own security. Build the habits I have described. Document your belongings. Seal your bag. Inspect it at baggage claim. File reports when you find evidence of tampering. And never, ever put anything in a checked bag that you are not prepared to lose. I am not trying to scare you away from air travel. I love to fly. I love the efficiency and the reach and the connection that aviation provides. But I have learned, sometimes the hard way, that the romance of travel does not extend to the cargo hold. The baggage system is a machine, and machines have no sentiment. They process, they transport, they occasionally break. Your job is to make sure that when the machine processes your belongings, it returns them to you in the same condition you gave them. And if it does not, your job is to hold the machine accountable. Now I want to hear from you. I have shared my experiences and my research and my recommendations, but every traveler has a story, and I know that some of you have been through situations that I have not even imagined. So drop it in the comments. Tell me about the time you opened your suitcase and something was missing, or something was there that should not have been. Tell me about the time you watched your bag disappear behind the counter and wondered if you would ever see it again. Tell me about the time you decided never to check a bag again, or the time you caught a problem before it became a crisis. Your stories are not just cathartic, they are educational. They are the collective knowledge that the industry refuses to share, and they help every traveler who reads them become a little more prepared. I will be reading the comments, and I will respond to as many as I can, because this is not a monologue. This is a conversation, and it is a conversation we need to keep having until the system finally catches up with the reality of how vulnerable we really are. Until then, travel smart, travel aware, and never assume that your checked luggage is safe just because it is out of sight. It is out of sight, but it is not out of danger, and now you know what to do about it.